Hi, I'm IKEA, and for today's video, we'll be continuing on our build collection updates. We've already done character 1 and 2, of course. We'll be moving on now to character number 3, as it appears on the build collection. And that is, of course, all the builds from 3.01 all the way to 3.16, as that is kind of how the build collection is laid out. These builds basically are equivalent to what I have in the game, basically, in the loadout slots. So... And yeah, the reason I wanted to kind of do it in this form is, yeah, we've had some updates, although of course not enough to just go through everything. Mostly have been weapon updates, and weapons have been changed around for a lot of builds actually. But I also kind of wanted to take this time to explain both kind of what the changes are as we'll go through every build, but then also explain what the build is kind of for, what the intent of it is and what I use it for, and also how hard it is to put together. I thought this would be a good moment to do that for basically all the builds in the collection. As yeah, all of them did get touched a little bit, at the very least, if nothing else, some weapon changes here or there. And yeah, we'll go through character trees, all of their builds here. Everything will be timestamped down below, so you can jump to specific builds if those interest you. Yeah, let's go get started with build number 1. And we start off with 3.01, of course, and that is an OD, a full red OD here with Vigilance Coyote, Cheska Vigilance Backpack. Changes-wise, the big change, of course, to OD was that the chest is now much more viable and actually very much a great pick for OD. It still has some issues versus, for instance, going versus glass, which would, for instance, do more damage as well, or obliterate, which would do the same amount of damage. And one of the downsides is that, yeah, if you are shooting at something that doesn't bleed at all, now you're losing much more damage than you would back then, or with those other talents, because those would still apply to Warhounds and such, for instance. But that is a fine enough trade-off to make to, for instance, get a Coyote in here, or actually other pieces as well. And then, yeah, here, of course, Cheska just got a little bit of a nerf. Carnage actually became one of the better picks here, so we're putting that one now in. I used to run much more with ARs, with just Sadist. And yeah, the Iron Lung is still definitely one of the top picks for in this build, and a very good way to start off the chain. We, of course, have some other options as shown here. Also, as well, going with the OD Mask, for instance, here, and Contractors. If we take this actually into the game, we'll see that in Loadout 1, it is actually saved as a 5-piece. I oftentimes save build this way. We've already seen a few come by. I'll explain again here that, yeah, it is mostly this way, just so I have multiple options. By having these pieces saved this way, I can either, for instance, yeah, put in a Coyote here, for instance, and have the matching build as there, but also I can have Contractors in there. And this is actually a good setup as we have it here. For instance, if there's already enough Coyotes, I'd rather go with this Contractors. This is one of the better setups for it, especially, of course, with the Carnage there applying. But then as well, we could, for instance, put the new holster in. We could go in many ways, basically, right? If we were to main a rifle, for instance, with this, we could go with a Fox's Prayer. Saving it in this way gives me a lot of options, and then basically I grab in pieces from other builds, as for instance, this Coyote is saved with something else, and then we bring it in here. This is actually a valuable thing to do. And yeah, of course, what OD is very much for is that we can use it to basically have infinite ammo. We use this especially in group settings or even solo to kind of bypass some of the ammo directives. That's what it is very useful for. But of course, also has a group buff component, so especially in countdown and such, it is very potent, and having one in the team really does make a difference. It has become much more of a powerful build than it used to be, and a lot of that is down to Sadist being 10% more, basically, going from 20% on the base to 20 to 30, and of course for the Carnage, even going from 25 to 35, which is a very big bonus to have just on one talent that is quite large. It's more than glass when it's active, and of course this will have the uptime for it, and of course this makes a lot of things bleed, and then as well allows, for instance, for teammates to maybe go with Sadist as well. Backpack wise as well, we can go with Wicked or Vigilance as we have it here. I actually quite often prefer Vigilance for countdown, where we have 7 teammates / decoys, because I don't get hit much there anyway. And Wicked would just be 7 total weapon damage less. Here, a separate multiplier at full, so they would be at full effect. But yeah, I can go either way, and actually we'll be seeing a Wicked version later on character 5. And yeah, this setup is very much easy to put together. It is, of course, just red pieces. These already, the OD parts come with red pieces. OD as a gear set cannot be crafted, but yeah, it's very easy to farm for. You just a few countdowns and you'll have the pieces together for it. Well worth having as a setup, just for the group utility of it, especially for in countdown, basically, where it's buffing 7 other people as well. It is very potent. Even in a 4-man team, it is still pretty potent, but then we're mostly using it, for instance, to bypass the low ammo directive or even pistolero, because if we were to run gunner here, it would give a little bit of ammo to our teammates, and then basically they would not lose ammo as long as we're doing our job and keeping the bleed rounds going, because those bleed rounds, basically, as long as you keep refilling it quite often for your allies and yourself, will make it so that, yeah, you basically don't run out of ammo. Let's move on to the next. As we continue, of course, on to 3.02. The striker on this character, as often we've seen already, the 0.02 is usually the striker for these characters. And yeah, on there we see a chest striker together with a Coyote and a Cheska piece, basically. And yeah, this is very much set up actually for the incursion. This is the one that I use basically to do the recommended build for incursion. Here with an SMG, and then also actually a setup to be 60 crit chance, basically, and just expecting just close range Coyotes, basically. It is set up to not expect mid-range or higher. Of course, what we could do is set this up if we're just using it in general ways, or we're expecting Coyotes from other people, for instance, in countdown or such. We could go with a group of glove, of course. Changes wise, of course, yeah, striker did take a little bit of a hit on its backpack, but especially with the chest striker, you definitely want to have the backpack there. And furthermore, it's some weapon changes. This used to be with an Oreo, of course. Now it's with attack vector with measured here. And yeah, rock and roll for stacking. Rock and roll for stacking is pretty handy for a chest striker. If we take it into the game, what we see is actually, and what I kind of want to show as it's kind of saved there, it is actually saved with a Grupo glove and a Cheska mask. More so because, yeah, I end up quite often using it by itself outside of incursion. But then, of course, I do have that Cheska glove. So on most of my characters, actually, I have a Cheska and a Grupo glove. And then with the strikers, if I want to make a chest striker, that's usually how they're set up there. So we could go that route. But also, as with all of my characters, I actually have all 6 pieces of striker on them, basically, at all times. And that is there to give me all the options. Because kind of like with the OD that we saw a second ago, I can go either with the striker chest or go with an obliterate chest from a different build and a Coyote. And then, of course, we could swap this to an AR, which we would want now. Or as well, actually, I believe she has a Grupo chest, and this would be for SMGs. This would be the way to set it up, for instance. And this, of course, gives me basically all of the options. We could even go Cheska mask, as I have that with as we have that saved there with, for instance, a Bloody Knuckles, which is usually we have one character running the Coyote on incursion, and the other 2 are running Bloody Knuckles. So we can go basically for whatever setup we kind of want to go. Even if you wanted to have Memento in here, yeah, I could just pull in this chest or that mask and kind of keep the obliterate chest and just plop in a crit chance or crit damage with Memento, depending on what I'm kind of going for. And that gives me all of the options. And that is actually a very nice way to set that up. And I highly recommend that generally. And of course, yeah, striker is the go-to for just all-out murder. Whenever we need high damages, we lean towards this. And it's also a very easy set to get together. The chest, basically, as long as you have, you could go even with the striker chest, although, of course, stacking to 200 is always kind of the limiting factor for the striker chest. Sometimes it's very viable, for instance, the incursion. Sometimes it's a lot harder, especially, for instance, the modifiers are on and your share, or, you know, you're running around countdown and basically everything is melting away too fast. So yeah, you kind of, usually I go with obliterate chests quite often, but I always want to have that option there. It's not choosing between the two, it's situationally grabbing the one that makes more sense. And yeah, very easy to put together. We can just farm whatever chest we kind of have, another piece basically, and you, as long as you basically have this 4-piece striker bonus, you can already extract a decent amount of damage out of this. And 4.03 follows that up, and that is usually as well on a lot of my characters. The 0.03 is their high-end builds. Are they still quite needed? I've gone with, for instance, character 1 being a pesty, character 2 being a rifle, high-end, where they kind of make more sense. This is, of course, more of a kind of classic, more so high-end red. Here, kind of foregoing Providence and kind of setting up for Obliterate. Generally, if you aren't going to use Perfect Glass, then usually it's better to just leave out Providence. And that's what this is going for. And this, we used to have the nomenclature for high ends before, you know, the popularity of strikers and stuff, where we had the high ends being called Generation 1, Gen 1s with Providence. And then Generation 2, it was basically without Providence, and then going Cheska, Fenris, Grupo. And there was a good reason as well for that. We'll in the future, we'll do a little bit of a history video with the build collection and stuff, and we'll explain it kind of in there. But for those to maybe trigger some memories, colored mod slots, if you remember those. Yeah, so here we're going with Cheska, Fenris, Grupo, Contractors, Fox, and a Coyote's Mask. The very classic setup for this. And this, for instance, as well, still has a place and a time. For instance, currently Hollywood is active. Actually, Strikers is really struggling because you blow everything up in instant and then you really can't get any stacks. This needs stacks less, not so much as well with like a full glass red that would need even less to do with stacking. But here, still we're kind of, there isn't much in the form of stacking except for the Obliterate on the chest. Change-wise, of course, yeah, some of the brand bonuses here got hit a little bit. The Cheska, the Grupo, but especially as well, one of the things that has helped high-ends quite a bit, one of the things was that they were always kind of awkward to get their crit chance, crit damage on. Usually the 2-mod weapons, so for instance an F2000 was the way to go for them because you could put 2 crit chances on it, you could land on like the 52 on them. Now, though, what you can do instead is, of course, flip a crit chance to crit damage. So many more weapons fit much more easily onto this build than used to. You can go actually with a FAMAS or Lexington, for instance, and just put 3 crit damage mods there, for instance, or 2, to kind of, yeah, burn down a little bit of the crit damage if need be. And even then, for instance, going with other pieces than, for instance, even the Contractors. And yeah, that does open up a bunch of options for high-ends. Although this one I've kept basically quite simple. If we take it into the game briefly, yeah, it is kind of set up as is there. This one is saved inherently with the Coyote because we don't really have any replacement part for in here. With the Providences, of course, you could have a Grupo piece there, or even a Grupo piece, for instance, as a replacement for the Contractors, and then even lose, you would go with a crit chance less and give up the damage to armor, and especially if you're fighting things that don't have much armor, then that will do better. But yeah, especially just setting it up for, and that's just, yeah, a general use case build. It is very easy as well to put together. That is one of the reasons to kind of go for this. None of the pieces are very hard to farm, although actually Strikers, of course, is still actually easier to put together than this. But yeah, well, we're having side by side, and that's usually how my characters are set up as well. Usually they'll have a high end there. And yeah, still somewhat useful at times. And going on to 3.04, high-end half-healer. And half-healers are a style of build that, yeah, they don't happen much anymore. They were support builds, basically, for TurDro builds. The popularity of TurDro builds has gone way down, especially with the more modern gear sets ever since the kind of introduction of Heartbreaker and then its nerfs and then Striker kind of rising above it and such. Those kind of builds can do so much damage that it's kind of hard to still go with the TurDro build. But this is still one that I'm keeping around, and it is still useful here and there. And then, yeah, why it is called a half healer, it is literally half damage, half healing. As we have skill damage, repair skills all around, basically. Each of the stat blocks is that. All of the mods are then repair skill. We're not actually going with any haste here. The turret still, even without all that haste, is still coming back in 17.9 seconds as we have it there. The Hive, of course, is getting a ton of skill haste here from the Btsu. Setup-wise, or changes-wise, not much has changed for this, of course. We do get a little bit less out of the Wyvern. We get a little bit less skill efficiency from the third piece Empress here. But overall, that's not big changes to this build. Scorpio, of course, also kind of took a hit, but still in the case that we're using it here, which is just to stagger enemies and such, it still does that because, yeah, we can still stagger them with the poison, the reds and purples at least. The disorient will stagger everybody, and the shock will, of course, be very shocking to your enemies. And yeah, for those actually, yeah, that kind of missed it maybe, this is a healing hive on the other end, and yeah, it's basically doing some healing and it's doing some damage by itself. And this used to be, yeah, pretty good support build alongside of TurDro builds. We would quite often actually, for instance, for legendaries in the past, run TurDro builds because running it versus, for instance, now we can get a lot more damage out of a striker than we could back then, for instance, out of an obliterator red. So it was actually back then a much more viable choice than now. And then, yeah, we could put on some help out people with some Overwatch, with some perfect opportunistic, as well, of course, that would apply from the SVD here, of course. The in sync would trigger from that. SVD is now auto, but this build isn't per se using it as in a damage sense. We're just triggering in sync with it for our turret, mostly. Still somewhat useful of a build if we take it into the game, as I do end up using it here and there for just buffing stuff. We can also take Technician to take Artificer with this to heal other people's builds or other people's skills and such with it, or just give them buffs to it. Here, of course, in the game, I actually save it with also a Harmony there, but yeah, generally, as the build picture there shows, I'm going to grab a Scorpio alongside of it. Still somewhat useful. It can do a little bit of that healing and a little bit of that damage, but of course, its healing is very limited to that Hive. It can give us give an overcharge and such. And yeah, it can actually heal decently well as well. It is actually, because yeah, it has a ton of repair skills. That healing hive does actually heal pretty potently. And yeah, it has a tiny bit of damage. It is overall, I think, of course, FI, giving a buff to your allies for a full healing build, much more useful, especially if you're running alongside of reds. But yeah, back in the day, running alongside of TurDro builds, this was actually a pretty good thing to grab. It is very easy to put together. The pieces are, of course, all yellow core pieces. We are recording here the setup, but you could also keep it blue core if you get one, and just go with Technician instead. That is also a very handy setup to go here with, and then you can even go with the Artificer there as well. And with 3.05, we come to the Eclipse on this character. Quite often that is in the 0.05 slot. And this is the baseline Eclipse, as I quite often call it, for instance, in the masterclass and such as well. This is to me, the classic Eclipse, basically. Here we're running it with, for me, a Fire Cam and a Stinger Hive. Setup-wise, we're with a Vial and an Electric piece, and then 4-piece Eclipse with chest and backpack. A lefty, a Scorpio, Survivalist as our specialization for the bonus to our allies. Changes-wise, not much changed here, of course. In the end, they did not apply that status effect change they were going to do to Electric. They wanted to take it down to 8, but they kept it at 10 in the end. Lefty, of course, did take a hit. Scorpio also took a hit. Lefty went from a group buff of 40% to 20%. It is still a group buff, even though text doesn't say so, or actually says the inverse of just the person applying the mark. That kind of escaped PTS2 by the looks of things. And actually, one of the reasons we'll be updating wrong texts guide in the future. Scorpio's changes actually here doesn't really make a big difference. Scorpio is still the only thing that can do what it can do, which is apply poisons and such, and disorients and shocks, which can, of course, all be transferred through this. So I will definitely, I still keep that Scorpio around. If we take it in the game, we see that it's actually saved with a different shotgun here. But that is actually just saved this way because I do like having InSync as an option. We can use that to refire where we apply fire to an enemy. If we hit in sync, now we have a stronger fire. That stronger fire will now, if we can basically set them on fire again while they're burning. But of course, I have that lefty at the ready, and generally I do just grab the lefty. Here with Survivalist as well, with easy grenades basically to trigger that. And yeah, it is still a group buff, and 20%. Even though it's no longer 40%, 20% is still a worthwhile thing to here and there apply to enemies. And yeah, my preferences are always with the fire chem especially, and the Stinger Hive. This, of course, yeah, usage-wise is very much a build that in group settings especially I run. I like it a lot in groups, not so much solo, even though you can definitely, and then you go with a capacitor as kind of on the build picture. Also, we had the capacitor there. Solo as well, you would go firewall with it instead of survivalist, because survivalist especially has a flame grenade and the group buffs, both more so for applying sledges for your group mates with the fire grenades, and then also giving the 10%. But then, here we're just especially using it in a group sense. And I like running this in a group, especially for missions and such, where I feel having 4 red builds is actually slower than having 2 red builds and a good Eclipse player. Because a good Eclipse player will kind of keep everything, will catch most of the waves, will apply, will weaken the smaller stuff will die to them, the stronger stuff will kind of be weakened by the point that they kind of get out of a door. And because of all that, and also CCing them while damaging them with the fire, that makes it, a very potent crowd controller. Of course, there is, with all of my characters as well, they're kind of set up to be able to be altered into a foam Eclipse. So here in this case, for instance, I have a mask in my stash and a backpack that I can go and grab, and with a courier backpack and just an Eclipse mask, turn this into a foam Eclipse, and then, of course, swap out the skills if need be for instance, legendary. A very worthwhile build to have. One of my core builds, especially basically every character does have an Eclipse on my build collection, and for a very good reason. And we come to 3.06 here, a build that I don't use much, but here and there I do grab it and enjoy my time with it. It is very much a build that is there to just play differently here and there, because I'm very proficient at Eclipsing. So this is definitely a downgrade usually if I swap to this, which is X0. And this setup for X0 is kind of the one that I found works overall the best, in my opinion, for my playstyle as well. Where we have the 4 pieces of X0, a Btsu, and a sacrifice. We generally don't want to go with the chest of X0. The backpack is kind of usable. The chest, we're going here with a perfect glass cannon. The Btsu allows us as well to have a Stinger Hive and kind of have the haste as well for it, and to kind of get some damage out that way as well, kind of overlapping both of them. We can also go with actually going Technician and Artificer Hive and kind of increasing the duration of the Incinerator turret. X0, of course, did not receive any real changes. None of the changes as well, for instance, to Providence, getting less headshot damage. Doesn't really matter to here. It has kind of stayed the same, and this especially can kind of use a buff, and likely in the future, I'm hoping alongside of True Patriot and others like Rigor and maybe even System Corruption, that this also gets a buff. Because it is kind of substandard, and kind of we did a build showcase on it with the conclusion basically that it's not bad, but Eclipse is better. I could see them especially upping up the damage of this quite a bit, and that could make it a little bit more potent than Eclipse in certain situations. I would hope for that. But for now, it has kind of stayed as it was. As we take it into the character here, we see again the repeating pattern of saving it with 5 pieces equipped. And that is especially done to go with multiple options, because I can put the Btsu glove in as we had on the build picture. I could also just put in a Vial Mask, which is a setup that you can kind of go for. I find the Btsu much more useful. Another setup that works decently well is the Costa Go Bag. for just having an easy way to overcharge the turret, and that works very well, of course. Giving myself basically a bunch of options to run this build with by saving it this way. And of course, Exora is kind of the brother to Eclipse. What it gives you is that the incinerator turret now, instead of being an arc, is kind of in a 360. Effectively, it turns it into behind the scenes into a hive, basically, that is kind of setting things on fire. It's sometimes does need line of sight and such. One of the downsides as well to it is that it doesn't cross door boundaries, so enemies on the other side of a door do not actually get set on fire until they step out, where, for instance, with a fire cam of a fire eclipse, you can actually set them on fire, damage-wise as well. And fire eclipse will actually outdo this quite consistently, just because you can send out so much more fires, do that more effectively. Running this, trying to, run around with this turret and get it into position and such can be quite the hassle. But yeah, it is a very easy build to put together, excluding the sacrifice, because this is not per se, it is a unicorn. It's not a super unicorn. It does, especially you would want the blueprint for this being a classic name. It doesn't drop a lot. So yeah, trying to find the right one would be kind of hard, but you could go, for instance, with just an electric with status effect and haste, and then normal glass cannon, or even status effect and skill damage and normal glass cannon. That'll be close enough to this. I do like having the build. I use it here and there sometimes, but yeah, it gets very much outclassed by Eclipse. And on to 3.07. This is a combination hybrid, combining a Headhunter together with a TurDro Hybrid, basically. And this in a high-end setup. Later on as well, we'll see on Character 5 a hotshot setup trying to achieve the same thing. Changes-wise, of course, the White Death kind of came back as one of the core weapons that we want to go for here as well. We're going with that. Although as well, I've been experimenting with the Scalpel and maybe getting a few more red cores, especially. Although as well with Future Perfect, and we'll actually maybe revisit this at some point in the future, as already a build showcase does exist about this specific build that you can go and watch if you're interested in what it can do. But yeah, what it kind of does is that it has a turret and a drone at 6 skill tiers. They do not like great damage because we don't have the brand bonuses behind those, but the brand bonuses are mostly there to pump up our weapon damage. And then what we can kind of see is that even with that White Death, with the tournament, we can start on a red. The second shot can be an elite already, and from there we can kind of, we're kind of going, and our top shot is actually even enough for a named, as long as it isn't an LMG or heavy, for instance. So this is actually a build that kind of does work decently well. I do find myself grabbing it quite often, especially going up against factions that do have helmets, because then I'll have my turret and my drone, especially, for instance, hyenas. The rushers are the helmeted ones. They can be very easily killed by these turret and drones. Even if they don't hit hard, they'll just eat them up pretty quickly. And then what I do is then just focus on just sniping around for myself. I do quite enjoy these builds, and there's a build showcase on them if you want to kind of see what they can do, because it might not be fully clear just from the build picture. If we take it into the game, we see that is kind of saved like that. I want to also make a note here that, that's the case with all of the weapons we've seen so far. You may look at these build pictures and see higher grading than I have here. Usually on the characters themselves, I have actually ungraded items, and then usually my graded items actually live in the stash. So I grab them when I need them. So that's where that's where those gradings are. This build did not change much, of course. Some of the stats on some of these went from 15 to 13 headshot. White Death kind of came in. Scalpel, for instance, actually became much more usable because its base damage is not that much lower now anymore than everything else. I've been kind of experimenting, having a few more red cores, as we can really easily flip those as well here and going with the Scalpel. To get this build together, though, is actually quite a hassle. We do need, for instance, a peak arrows and then also a Brazos piece to recore, and then also 2 Habsburg pieces to recore. But we're not going for the super unicorns. We're just going for the unicorns because, yeah, here we have pieces that are not with talents, as yeah, the chest piece is the talent piece. Well, of course, yeah, this build by itself, just because it isn't kind of an awkward hybrid, will require a bunch of optimization, making it not per se for the newer players. This is much more a thing to try out if you already have a ton of resources and can easily spend this to try it out, because yeah, you might not like it per se. And yeah, this build is actually one that I quite enjoy, and I do grab it quite often here. Because yeah, you don't need the hardest hitting hunter, you just need it to be enough. And honestly, sometimes it's kind of handy, for instance, here to have basically two very powerful decoys going around, kind of keeping you safe. And on 3.08, we see the Striker TurDro Hybrid, another hybrid, again as well, TurDro. Usually that's my indicator of hybridizing towards a turret and drone setup. And here we see strikers with a memento, and then record pieces on several parts to get to 6 skill tiers for the turret and drone. So this basically has a 6 skill tier drone. We're using as well perfect glass to kind of bump up both the damages of them and also of our own weapon. And this is very much a build of a combination of trying to get as much damage out of the gun together with decent enough still damage out of the turret and drone, of course. And yeah, not much, of course, changed for this. This isn't in this setup actually using the Striker backpack anyway. We're using a memento, so it's kind of working out very easily for that. Also as well, if you're wanting to use it in this setup, you don't actually need this yellow core sacrifice. This yellow core could be on this mask. There is a specific reason I have it in this way though, where the mask isn't the record part, even though that, as you can see up there, it could be the record part, because yeah, that is, the core has been actually record, but to red, which is basically back to red, of course, there. But yeah, changes wise, not much change here. The capacitor actually became a lot more powerful than it used to be last season, although, well, marginally more powerful, not severely, because yeah, the guy should get a bump up from its sub-weapon, the PDR, the weapon that it's based on, becoming a lot better. If we take it into the game, we see that repeating pattern of things being saved with 5 pieces, and that's also why that mask is actually the red here, because we could actually have just a red sacrifice here, and then with that memento, because yeah, the yellow could be there. But again, why this is saved here, and also what showed up on that build picture in the corner, is we could actually go with the Coyote here. A setup that works decently well. I prefer it, for instance, for the Negotiator to have the Coyote mask and have the Negotiator backpack. On this one, though, I do much more lean towards having that Memento backpack here. Yeah, with crit damage, actually. Just making sure, because I have one saved with crit chance, I have one saved with crit damage, actually, on Mementos even. And that actually makes it quite easy to just, for some builds, yeah, it requires a crit chance one. That way this mod doesn't actually get ejected into my mod pool. And yeah, build-wise, this is actually a pretty good solo setup. The turret and drone kind of keep things off of you, and of course, actually are potent enough to kill. They are 6 skill tiers, and we're bumping them up a little bit with the capacitor. We're using the damage component of the capacitor. And then we're maining the capacitor as its own damage and recouping some of the yellow cores into red cores, basically. Now, of course, this doesn't hit as hard as a red build, but the combination of having that turret and drone kind of also acting as decoys for you, just teammates for you, actually works pretty well. These used to actually keep up, well, high-end turret drone hybrids used to keep up with glass reds, for instance, really well. This doesn't per se keep up with a full red striker that well, but for instance, running this solo, I would much prefer running this solo, even without the revive hive, than running a full red solo, basically. Just because, yeah, this actually has much more survivability consistently, because those turret and drones will kill stuff for you on your sides, or things that you can not easily get to, but maybe be pinning you down, like, let's say, a sniper in a back corner or somewhere. And then, yeah, especially, of course, the Memento being a really good solo piece there as well. This is, though, a little bit more of an expensive build to get together. Even if we were to go with a full red sacrifice, we're then recoring some striker pieces from being red cores to yellow cores. That will mean that, yeah, you will kind of need to spend some optimizations here. So it's not the most cheap build to put together, but also not, it's not horrendously hard. It does take some optimization resources. And also, as well, if you have most of the pieces together, you can actually kind of overlap it with the combat medic, because in layout they're actually quite similar, right? They use the same yellow cores with a crit chance or crit damage underneath it. They just have different skills kind of equipped. And next up, we come to Umbra. Yeah, let's not have that. Yeah, Umbra on 3.09 as we have it here. Umbra is a build that I've actually kind of had in the build collection, basically, well, since its inception. Although now, of course, with the changes to it, where they've increased the buffs that you get from it to crit damage and rate of fire, it has actually become much more potent than it used to be. It is actually a contender for the third spot behind strikers and Heartbreaker and Negotiator, well, a fourth spot maybe, behind those as actually a very usable build now as well. Of course, the downside of it is you have to get into cover and charge it up. But first off, yeah, kind of talking about the changes to it, it does actually now have decent damage. We compare it as well, of course, with any weapon type. It is kind of weapon agnostic, the same way that, for instance, Striker is, which is kind of nice because, yeah, we can, for instance, as well go with rifles. Actually, I feel fit in really well for Umbra. As well as they can, because yeah, as a class they're kind of weak, but actually if you're going for rifles, yeah, Umbra is actually a pretty good pick for them. And yeah, we definitely in the setup, the chest is a pretty good piece, so we're kind of going with that, taking the Coyote, a Fenris backpack, and then specifically Fenris here because we're already getting so much crit damage, of course, from the gear set as well, that actually the specific weapon damage, like Fenris here for ARs, does beat it out pretty consistently. But of course, we could go, yeah, for instance, with, although if we're going with LMGs and such, Contractors and Fox's Sparrow make a lot of sense. We would still want to keep this backpack slot, basically high end, because the backpack of Umbra, well, it does help healing quite a bit. We also have 4 med packs. Those help healing much more than any backpack talent really does. If we take it into the game, one of the things I might actually change in the future is I might actually save this as 5 pieces Umbra, basically in the same way as we have with a bunch of other builds. And that way we can slot in, for instance, yeah, Contractors or Fox's Prayer, although we would want to do that with a different backpack than the Fenris, of course, if we're maining an LMG or such. But yeah, for now it is safe for me to be able to either go with the Grupo or the Coyote, depending on how many Coyotes we kind of have in the group already. As for usage for this is very much a red build, but one that actually does require a little bit of either more of a coordinated group that isn't just running ahead, or you need to be very smart about how much you go into cover, because we need to go into cover, charge up a bonus. Basically, when we get out of cover for damage, we apply that to our weapon, basically doing more crit damage at a higher rate of fire. And because of that, for instance, in things like countdowns and such, you find yourself kind of, yeah, not having the time to kind of get into that cover, get the bonus. By the time you do, most of the things are, well, especially for instance, at the starting hunters, they're kind of dead already by the time you're kind of charged up. And a lot of other fights as well, you find yourself kind of being behind it. So yeah, it does have its downsides that way, but it's definitely usable. And yeah, alongside of basically strikers, heartbreakers, negotiators being overall maybe a little bit higher than this, this does somewhat occupy the 4th slot, actually, as far as damage, or well, DPS-based damage dealing builds, because yeah, we're kind of excluding hotshot and stuff, of course, that way. But yeah, if we're kind of doing shooty builds, this is kind of the 4th one in that row, in potency. And yeah, it's a very easy build to put together. It comes with red cores. You kind of reuse some of the pieces, especially if you already have, for instance, other builds similar to this, although of course, yeah, this does use a backpack, which a lot of builds don't. You could, of course, yeah, just go with Grupo if you just need an easier piece, because you might have that, for instance, from Hunter's Fury or some such. And yeah, weapon-wise, it is a weapon agnostic, so it can go with, it comes with crit chance and reload speed. It can go with a lot of weapons here, especially, for instance, as well, for instance, Pestilence even, or Bighorn. It has a reload bonus as well, so actually slower reloading weapons benefit from it quite a bit. Rifles as well, I feel, are a very decent pick for here, because this is one of the builds where this and Negotiator, where rifles definitely can be decently potent, but although for a class, of course, they're pretty weak compared to, for instance, ARs, sadly. So hopefully they'll get a buff, especially the second stat kind of needs quite a big push up. Overall, a build that is well worth trying out, especially for a different playstyle. I generally grab this if I'm kind of bored of strikering and heartbreakering, and I just want to play it a little bit different, because just that difference of, okay, I need to go into cover and then come out to fire. That means that also now I'm kind of looking at cover quite different. All short cover is kind of out of the way. I need tall cover because I need to be out of cover to fire, and I'm standing up. So I need basically corners and such. It changes a little bit how you're interacting with the game, and that's sometimes enough. Continuing on with a 3.10. We're coming here to Red FI. Red FI is a setup where we kind of try to take FI and redify it. Pun intended there somewhat. And we're recoring 5 pieces to kind of go full into the damage. There is some benefits to this as well, where we're kind of actually doing some decent damage. We're not hitting super hard, but here, for instance, with a capacitor, we're still hitting decently hard. And keeping ourselves having our damage. For that, of course, yeah, we give up some of our healing, but it is very, very worthwhile, especially in a 7-man team, kind of like with raids or cantons, to have one of these around. Not much change, of course, for FI itself. For this build, yeah, the Cheska losing 2 didn't make too much of a difference. Instead of 54, we're at 52 now. We are expecting to basically have Coyotes around us, because we're basically leaving that to them just for ourselves to take the Btsu. The capacitor actually fits in pretty well here, although actually on a different Redify, I'm actually going with Bullet King. You can also go with many weapons actually here. So in the past, I did used to also have, for instance, the St. Elmo in that slot. You don't, the capacitor here at 2 cores is actually kind of at even odds with a lot of other weapons in this slot. We're still going here with it and kind of wasting its damage components. But yeah, quite a few weapons could actually match it or surpass it, especially as well, for instance, with if you trigger killer or such. But you wouldn't per se want to run this solo. This is very much a group buff build. Getting it wise, it is actually very, very an annoying build to get together. As we kind of see here, I have it again as well, saved in those same 5-piece setups as we've been seeing with quite a few builds on this character. And that is, again, because we can go with different options here. One of the things is, yeah, we could just put in a Coyote of our own, for instance, in a 4-man team. But yeah, the Btsu works really well, especially getting this, giving the bonuses to this hive. And we can even get the overcharge to work for our teammates, where we overcharge first ourselves, basically blowing up a hive, getting us ourselves to skill tier 6 and overcharged. And then if we do it again while we're overcharged, we're actually applying it to the team. So we can actually even do that supercharge. One thing that has become much more useful now is the mechanical animal. The weapon itself has become much more useful. The SIG, the base weapon it is based on. And this, of course, being the perfect version of Future Perfection, does actually give us 4 skill tiers at max, and we're at 2. So we could actually, with this weapon, go from being at 2 skill tiers all the way to 6 and then overcharging ourselves. I find myself maining this quite a bit. You see as well actually that I have a different weapon here kind of saved up as a backup, because the capacitor is kind of saved with many builds. I'm gonna getting a fall here in with measured. This is kind of used as a weapon for reduced. If I want to extend the amount of that my ammo will go, basically trying to conserve some ammo. But yeah, as we kind of saw, capacitor is a good pick, although a lot of weapons here will be a decent pick for this. It is, of course, yeah, a very annoying build to get together because we're recording yellow cord items. This will mostly drop with yellow stats here. We need to find them with crit chance or crit damages here to record them. That might take a bit. That will also eat up some resources. Not a beginner-friendly build, but definitely a build worth having, especially if you count down a lot. And even going into the raids, actually, it is well worthwhile to have one of these up. It doesn't do much in the form of healing, but it doesn't need to as well. It's basically relying on other people. If they get hit hard, they'll just use their med pack, be back at full health. It has a little bit of healing here and there just to help it along if they take a little bit of ship damage. But you're not really focusing on that healing, not in the way that, for instance, a combat medic would. At least I don't when I run this build. A build well worth having, a build that, yeah, I have kind of on main account and also on second account, and even on third account, I have a Red Vigi, because they're very useful, for instance, for countdown. And in 3.11, we see a Hunter's Fury setup. This is the bog standard SMG setup, at least to me. We're going with a Sokolov group of beasts. Obliterate Vigilance, kind of my preferred talents for it. Although, of course, you can set it up in many ways. This is just one of the recommended ways that I have it, and kind of the way that I run it quite often. Here as well, taking it with 2 blue cores. That is especially for the shield. Not so much for the armor of the build itself, but just to have a little bit of a stronger shield. What mainly changed for this build, because the build itself did not change much. Of course, Grupo and, for instance, if you were to use Cheska or something, did lose a little bit. The weapons quite changed. We're going here with attack vector with measured as well with these silences. Although, of course, if you're kind of running this, solo killer is also a very good choice. Making as well the Dark Winter, for instance, here a really good choice. Chatterbox, if you're kind of doing the thing that it requires, and if you're keeping it above 2 or 3 stacks consistently, which isn't hard to do, and especially if you are kind of on 5 stacks and kind of going all ham, yeah, it is amazing of a tool. Here as well, we no longer really are going with the Oreo, for instance, where the Oreo was, of course, so much higher damage and everything else. You're going nowadays with some high-end weapons here. Also allows us, for instance, to have a Scorpio secondary, which really does help this build. Because if you run into something kind of dangerous, you can kind of stagger it and stun lock it with the Scorpio. Other options, of course, yeah, we kind of have in this corner where we have either going with Ridgeway, which is actually a very potent thing to do nowadays because of that sadist buff. Ridgeway is actually much more usable than it used to be. I do like it, especially though, for instance, more on PFT kind of setups, as we'll actually see on character 4. But you can also go Memento. Memento Cheska is the way to kind of go for if you're going Memento, because yeah, you can take the crit damage on there, and then the Cheska kind of aligns there. One thing as well as I kind of wanted to go into here is, for instance, putting in Vigil with Perfect Versatile. Nowadays, with the changes to the mods, especially on weapons, we can take, for instance, all crit damage on the SMG. Then we only have 21 crit chance from the second stat of the SMG. And then if we pair it, for instance, with a shotgun, because that combo is really good for Versatile, on the shotgun, we can put 10 crit chance on it. And now the difference actually between them isn't that 36 or, well, 31, depending on how many mods there was. 31 usually, for instance, for Oreo. And then to a shotgun, which would be 10. That was quite a, well, 21 difference, right? Nowadays, it can be just 10 difference in the crit chance. And that's actually very nice for, yeah, for instance, Vigil with its perfect Versatile. That's actually a setup that you can kind of go here. If we take it into the game, we kind of see actually that, yeah, it's saved with some other weapons, mostly because, yeah, I already have that attack vector from another build. We also have here an Dark Winter at the ready, for instance, for plopping in, as well an Emmeline's Guard, and then an MB7 and a converted SMG9 A2, although this should be not the A2 version, as we kind of discussed. But I kind of like having, yeah, if we already have the SMGs, I might actually just put different SMGs here, just to have multiple options, and then I might also try them out and just play around with them. That's also kind of how I build up my knowledge on which weapons are kind of worth running, just by having random quite a lot. But yeah, overall, this kind of setup is what I go with. This is, of course, a very easy build to set up. We just, in this case, we're recording 2 pieces. that will come at a cost because yeah, they drop with red cores. One thing as well here actually that I have here is that all of the pieces are actually re-cored on the core. That means if I wanted to go, for instance, 4 blue cores, I can, or even full red if I wanted to, I can. Especially as well, if I put in a memento, I usually take away these 2 blue cores. I don't need them here. I just want 2 skill tiers on the shield, basically. The memento would just provide that by itself, of course. And it's well worth having. This is kind of the run and gun build of the game, much more so than, for instance, Striker or such. Mostly as well because it has some protective functions in that healing to itself, and of course the disorient to enemies, especially if a pack kind of spawns upon you, you just murder one of them, that kind of disorients everything around it. That will save you quite a bit, and of course, yeah, just the armor on kill that this kind of has. And it has, of course, very decent damage. Hunter's Fury has always been a very potent build, and definitely one to consider. And as we come to 3.12, there's a little bit of a caveat here. The build actually in 3.12 is not this build. If we can zoom in, you'll see that in the corner it says 112 there. And that's for a reason, as yeah, the 312 is actually was an empty black spot. And last time we kind of went past it. Actually, I moved the backfire build from character 1 to there, which I quite often do. We just move around some builds. They might fit better on a different character or such. Or I might want to, for instance, in this case, I wanted the OD actually on character 1. So yeah, I kind of moved that build to them. And because we've already covered this, and if you're interested in this 3.12, go to character 1's overview, where it was also in the 12th slot. And yeah, we kind of already went through this, and this build actually in the future might get a build showcase by itself as well. So actually what the build that will kind of alter in, which is kind of the trade piece that kind of happened, was 1.12. And yeah, that is this OD, as we have it here. We'll zoom in a little bit here. OD, actually, one of the things that I wanted to mess around with it is that, especially for shotguns, we don't have that many choices for shotgun talents, especially on the chest. So Intimidate is usually my go-to for if we're going with shotguns. But of course, usually we need a partner talent to kind of trigger Intimidate with. So usually we go Adrenaline Rush, Intimidate. But of course, Perfect Opportunistic is actually a very good talent as well that we could use for shotguns. But then what do we put on the chest piece? And then especially now that the OD is actually much more powerful and potent just with the chest piece, it became kind of actually, I wanted to try this setup out. And it's actually been working pretty well. I've ran it here and there. We're triggering Opportunistics, of course. We're kind of not having to deal much with ammo, especially, for instance, in Countdown and such. This works pretty well. Although I would maybe, yeah, I've been playing around with how red we kind of want it. OD, of course, as we kind of discussed on 3.01, got a big buff to what its chest talent does, which is it went from going from 20 to 35 instead now to from 20 for the talent to 50 with the chest, making the chest much more usable. And yeah, we're kind of making use of that here, especially for instance for shotguns that kind of were lacking many of options. If we take this into the game, the role of this, of course, and we are over on character 1 as well for it, because yeah, that's actually what the build is. The role of this is to do the same OD thing, kind of mark a bunch of enemies, make them die. Here as well, we're kind of providing a second group of Opportunistic, one that doesn't get used much anyway. And then yeah, we're using Sadist in accordance with our OD to kind of get a really good weapon talent, making this actually hit decently hard, and when well used actually can kill pretty quickly, especially as well with modifiers and such. Of course, if we hit reversal and by the teeth, I can, even with this, kind of burn through enemies pretty quickly. And yeah, as I was talking about, we've been playing around with going different routes with the blue cores and such. And I'm not per se fully sold either way on having less or more, especially in the open world. I like having 2 blue cores here, especially again with the shield here as well. It is, of course, a pretty easy build to get together, kind of in the same way as with the OD. We could, especially if we're going all red, although here we're recoring 2 pieces, so yeah, for those we need some optimizations and stuff. The setup isn't too hard of a backpack to get. You will get the blueprint eventually from the blueprint pool of the supply rooms from control points. A Coyote in there, although of course, yeah, we could go, for instance, with a group of piece here if there's already too many Coyotes. As always, I have those things kind of at the ready. I might actually in the future as well make this a 5-piece, and then even try to maybe be able to alter this to maybe have other pieces in here, other backpack, and then maybe like go with rifles and such as well. But this allows actually for a pretty good test bed to kind of play around with shotguns with OD, and yeah, especially shotguns and pistols as well, kind of lacking good talents for chest. Basically, Intimidate is their go-to for it. OD actually kind of is a good fill-in for that, especially because of the now new and improved Sadist applying 30% to bleeding enemies. And we arrive at 3.13, one of the more popular builds of the build collection. The Striker Techtank, the Striker Bruiser, as it's called, in brackets, Techtank. And yeah, this is one of the core tech tanks. Striker and Heartbreaker are very much my go-to tech tanks. And if you're wondering what is a tech tank, well, first of all, I have also like other videos on them that go much more in depth. But at the core of it, it is a memento with a few more blue cores, getting a 6-tier shield, and then here as well, getting healed by a 2-tier artificer. So we're kind of every 10 seconds we have a shield that is 6.45 million. And that's getting healed every 10 seconds for 43% of its amount. And yeah, those are very much a type of build that I enjoy using solo. These have basically very strong shields that you can just hide behind. The rest of it is set up towards damage. Here as well, actually, I've gone with the Chameleon as the main picture for it, as the Chameleon actually did get pretty good buffs to it, basically reduction to the amount of shots that it kind of needs. Its bases as well kind of got altered a little bit in its favor, making it a very potent piece. It was already a decent piece ever since the changes to the third stats and where we could put detox on it, and it aligns actually pretty well here with this build, because this is very much a close range build that likes to get close into people's faces, and then we trigger this one up. Although of course, yeah, putting there's a bunch of other weapons we can go with, especially as well. Strega is a really good choice for this, although yeah, you need to alter your crit chances a little bit around as well. For instance, yeah, Dark Winter, or just of course a Lexington although I would go actually a Killer if we're using this solo, most likely, as that's kind of the place for it. The changes of Striker don't affect this build really at all, because it's not using the backpack already, it's using a memento instead. So basically, those changes did not come into here, because yeah, it was really only the backpack that got changed. Weapon-wise, though, yeah, it did affect our choices a little bit. This used to run with an Oreo. That's kind of out of the picture for now. As yeah, for instance, a Chameleon or a Strega can kind of outdo it pretty consistently. And yeah, I've been kind of enjoying it with the Chameleon. If we take it in game, first of all, yeah, that Striker backfire build just to show as well that did make it over here to this character. As yeah, sometimes I do trade basically builds between characters, and that build actually does make a little bit more sense over here. Going back to the Striker Tech Tank, yeah, it is very one of my core builds that I just quite often will grab. All my characters has a form of Tech Tank basically, so yeah, they are very much something that I basically every character of mine kind of need to have, although I try to keep it, yeah, for instance, character 1 has a high-end, character 2 has a negotiator, character 3 has a striker, character 4 has a heartbreaker. They're, you know, at least different between them, because they do play a little bit different between them. One choice we could make here as well, and kind of is an option, is to go, for instance, with the striker chest as well. Although here I would definitely kind of go with Chameleon, because with the Chameleon we can't really swap off. We can start with the ACS to get stacks and then swap to the Chameleon, but generally I just main the Chameleon and we kind of go with that 100 stack option. We could though, yeah, put in different weapons that may not be as affected by swapping to the ACS and back. And then go with the striker chest, and that will actually, of course, very much increase the power. Although here we're using it without the backpack, of course. So, but that is kind of this, yeah, what it always was with the chest option. As a build to get together, we do need to find a few pieces to recore. We also need a memento, which is sometimes hard to get. Although, of course, yeah, it's the luck of the draw. You might get it pretty easily. And then, yeah, we do need to recore 3 striker pieces because these will drop with red cores. That's also why the Heartbreaker setup is kind of easier to get together, because there we're recording 1 blue core to a red. Here we're recording 3 reds to blues. That does come at a cost, but not exorbitant, because yeah, you can even leave them unoptimized for the time being and try to build that and kind of see if you like it. Definitely one of the core builds that I would recommend to have, as I very much run them a lot, and very potent by themselves. This is my go-to for solo play. And with 314, we come to this character's PFE. Kind of like Eclipse, and kind of like having a Techtank, and kind of like having a striker. All of my characters usually have a PFE on them. They're very useful, of course, dealing with rogue fights and such. But also outside of that, in for instance, countdown and such, for extraction, they can be very powerful. On this one, I have an SMG one. Changes-wise, of course, yeah, we did change the weapons. This used to be very much an Oreo build that has gone to becoming an attack vector, of course. That does, again, allow us to, for instance, bring in a Scorpio secondary, which is kind of nice, just to stun lock some of the more dangerous enemies, let's say hunters during extraction or such. This build might actually see a little bit of revamp in the future, but for now we'll just showcase it as is. And that is that, yeah, with the attack vector and such, we're landing on the 60, and then we don't really need any crit chances, although we could forgo the Cheska, of course. But here I've kind of gone down a weird path where we've gone with crit damage and headshot. Not per se the best of choices, because these 5 headshots together kind of get me, when I do hit a head, basically get me 20% more damage than if they weren't there and were just, for instance, weapon handling or such. This one was very much kind of just, I'm going all in on, well, not all in on damage, of course. We're keeping the PFE end, but, and this is as well the build that kind of has all my 13s on it. If we take it into the game, yeah, it actually does have, as I've been quite often, people have gone, that's photoshopped, or you just move the mod around the whole time. Now, this actually does have 6 13 PFEs. I have a further 3 13 PFEs. That's actually on character 4. We'll see that a little bit in the future. I'm kind of likely going to rework this build. One of the things we see already here is, yeah, that is actually still saved with an Oreo. We're kind of going to step away from that and kind of go with crit damage on the weapon, because we can do that now, of course. And then we can flip a few of these headshots to something much more useful. In my case, I'm likely going to go with a chest and a backpack that don't have this headshot anymore, making them just common backpacks, basically. Much more easy to get as well. And then I might actually flip these headshots over to weapon handling, then having 3 weapon handling rolls to have, although yeah, I'm kind of still debating what we're going to do with it. PFE is, of course, is very handy for certain situations. As we kind of said already, there are rogue fights that kind of guarantee a completion, basically, making it much more consistent to get through them. Not per se faster, of course. You can just kill them quite quickly with a red, but when rogues pop up, I just grab this and it's a non-fight, basically. Same, for instance, as well, in countdown and such during extractions, these can push in and kind of do PFE things, which is kind of just be in the hunter's faces, the Black Dusk at the end's faces, keeping them busy while everybody's just slowly murdering them so that not many shots go towards your allies. PFE builds aren't easy to put together. You usually need a few improvised pieces. Here we're using all 3 improvised pieces as a high-end wood, generally, of course. And because of that, yeah, we need pieces that we optimize and such. These are pretty costly. These need to be crafted. But of course, as well, not super expensive. And then, yeah, having the 6 13 PFEs, yeah, that may take a while. I've been pretty lucky with my 13 PFEs, mostly from legendaries as well, from Legendary Summit and Legendary Strongholds. That's usually where you can best farm for them. They're either set Summit and then with a few directives with gear mods, or go for the Strongholds if they have gear mods on them, which occasionally happens. But this one, I might give a rework. Taking it much more conventional. We'll likely go crit damages on the weapon with a high end, taking it down to having crit chance, crit damages here on the chest and backpack, and likely swapping maybe those 3 headshots to weapon handling, making a little bit more sense there because, yeah, combining headshot and crit damage, definitely not the greatest choice, but we really didn't have much other options, especially when we were using an exotic weapon where we couldn't do that. And with that, we move on to 3.15. We'll see two builds here coming up on 3.15 and 3.16, which are much more testing builds than actual useful builds. This one is based around a regen. This is basically a regen build with SMG, and it's called the ArmourBall. This is just as a test bed for armor regen. We're also kind of going all in on armor regen, more so than we would want to, maybe, because we're also using, for instance, the alongside of Bellstone and the Emperor's Guard and TB's Golem, going with some armor rolls on the gear, which generally we wouldn't do. But here I'm very much going all in kind of on armor regen together with that memento. We can again see that when we charge up the memento, we get up to this like 140k, which is kind of as high as you're going to kind of get it with any kind of setup. And that still kind of pales actually in comparison to the 200k kind of that a Techtank can do on the shield. Now, of course, this is always going on, and on your shield, it can't be jammed off of you and such. But then the damage of this thing is horrendous in comparison to a Techtank, for instance. And that's kind of the reason as well why I generally don't go with these kinds of builds. They're basically I don't want to die builds somewhat. I'm still kind of putting in a little bit of damage. Of course, we're kind of still going with trying, for instance, that Cheska piece being in here and kind of trying to pump up some of the damage of the SMG there. But we're giving up way too much opportunity cost-wise. This is as well one of the builds to try to get Hunter Killer in here. As best of a use as we can find for it, basically. Because generally, if it's only worth it if you're kind of going for that regen, to go for the Hunter Killer, because normal Intimidate plus a brand bonus is generally better than oh well, at full stacks they basically land on the same number with Hunter with perfect Intimidate versus normal Intimidate on a damage brand. But then of course when they end at that same point, that means that their starting point is actually for the Hunter Killer for perfect Intimidate is actually much lower because that brand bonus is always active. If you have a Cheska or a Grupo there, that's always going to be active. So yeah, here though, yeah, we're going for regen, so it's actually not the worst of picks. And then what we have here is 6.5% regen, basically, from percentage-wise, and then a little bit more, a tiny bit more from those 5 armor regen rolls. Or well, 4 actually, because this one, of course, is the percentage one from Murakami, or from the Emperor's Guard. If we take it into the game, we see that it is kind of in that same way. I'm using this as well to kind of save other SMGs as we kind of had with the Hunter's Fury build that we had there. Just to have other weapons available because, yeah, even though I'm showing it with the attack vector there, but yeah, the attack vector is at the ready from the strikers on this character. And overall, this is not that useful of a build. It is sometimes kind of nice, for instance, on lower difficulties, especially if we're not per se going for time, but we just, I want to chat with chat, and I don't want to care about surviving if we're doing like on normal for, let's say, a priority objective or something. That might grab this. But that's, of course, not a real usage of a build. But this is very much, yeah, just a test bed, kind of to see how far we can push armor regen. And it turns out that, yeah, it's not really worth it. And we arrive at last, likely least, actually, on this case, 3.16, as we were talking about with the other build, the regen build on 3.15, with this last 2 being kind of test beds, not real builds, not really useful builds. They're much more as test beds. And this one is a test bed for hazard protection and explosive resistance. As with the layout that we have here, we are 100% hazard immune. We're 90% explosive resistance. And that is actually the cap as well for explosive resistance. And I know that for a fact because actually I tried this one first with RNK, having forgotten about that fact. And then we would actually, with 2-piece RNK, we were supposed to land on 95, but then it actually caps at 90. So yeah, we're going with 1-piece Langmo here. This isn't very useful as a build. You could use this as a raid tank or such, although the other raid tanks that we kind of showed on character 2, that's much more useful than this. I have used this here and there, especially to test out what is and isn't an explosion. So for instance, that initial explosion when they blow up the fence at the Capitol. With having explosive resistance, we can kind of test that and see that, yeah, actually it isn't explosion there, for instance. Very trivia stuff, not per se useful knowledge to have. I'm not sure when you're going to use that knowledge, but now you have it. And yeah, that's kind of what I use this setup for. Changes wise, using of course went to 30% on the 3-piece for hazard protection, which is actually pretty powerful now. That allowed us actually to take a YAL piece out here. This bellstone behind my head. This used to be a YAL piece. We put in a bellstone there instead, getting a 1% regen. We're also, yeah, still going here with Vanguard and then Protector, although the backpack is kind of free talentable to what we need it to be if we want to mess around with, for instance, yeah, Galvanize or other things like maybe even Adrenaline Rush to kind of help our own survivability, which like raid setups kind of usually use. We're using the Langmo here for the explosive resistance alongside of it. I generally just never pick this build for actual use. I've done actually some heroic missions and stuff with this in the past just to know how slow it would be. And yeah, it's horrendously slow and actually not even that useful. And yeah, this is truly a I don't want to die build if you were to use it, for instance, on heroic. But yeah, kind of just as useless as that as well. If we take it into the game, we can also kind of see that, yeah, I have actually some other weapons here. Here I'm using that as well. The first 2 slots to kind of, yeah, put in some weapons that I might want to use here and there, an Infantry MG5 here and an SR1, just because if I want to swap out to those. Because of course, yeah, we'll be maining the pistol here at Liberty. Although, yeah, as on the build picture there as well, we had a Mosquito. Mosquito, of course, now much more usable than it used to be. You can actually kind of keep one enemy kind of focused upon you, which is, of course, very useful. And although, yeah, the Liberty can kind of heal your shield instead of that. This also kind of shows how much I use this build. The Liberty on this has not been optimized yet, even though I've had it for forever. Neither is the Mosquito on this character. It's not very hard of a build to put together. These pieces, of course, all come with blue cores already, and then we're kind of keeping some of their stats. It has taken some optimization here and there, but yeah, not very hard build to put together, but not a very useful build to have. If you're going for the raid tank, go for the one that we already discussed on character 2, I believe 2.16 likely. This one has some purposes, especially just, yeah, messing around with explosive resistance. Sometimes as well, I've used this for DZ testing to kind of see if with this amount of explosive resistance, we can kind of push through mortars. And the answer is you can, but then you arrive at the other end, and likely they have 3 friends, and you can't do anything about any of that because you don't have the killing power to kind of follow that up with. A testbed build, sometimes useful to have, especially if you, like me, are into testing things, but in general, not per se very useful. And thus, we come to the conclusion of this video, looking into character trees, all of their builds. And yeah, I've been kind of enjoying going through the characters this way, and also, yeah, kind of explaining what the builds are for and what they're kind of how hard they are to get, together with their changes as well, of course. I think that that a lot of people have found it useful so far. And yeah, we saw all of character trees builds, although actually, yeah, we swapped out, of course, 312 for 112 around, basically. But that was a trade, so yeah, we kind of showed what actually did come into the build collection, which was the 112 that we kind of saw. And yeah, we'll continue on in the future going, yeah, as obviously character 4 and character 5 still have to be done. And the build collection itself is actually completely updated now. I've even done a second pass over all of the builds and kind of made sure that there's not many errors remaining, hopefully. If you still find any errors, do be sure to reach out to me either on Discord or just in the comments under any of these videos, and just, yeah, point out any errors if you find any. The one thing remaining is actually just the folders at the top. I kind of want to add a few builds to some of them, and of course I still want to maybe add a few folders, for instance hardcore. That would be nice for in the future. But that's all future stuff. We're also going to go into rambling talk, likely not far into the future, about killer and how it actually kind of triggers and why it is basically more than 60% if you're at 60% crit chance. And then, of course, as well, the Lengmo Pestilence build showcase, the one based on Character 1's high end, basically. We'll go into those into the future. So yeah, I hope you join me for those. If you enjoyed this video, please do any and all of the algorithm things down below. It does help a lot, so I'll do that a little bit of shilling. Yeah, I hope you join me for those future videos. And as always, have a good night.